I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, and I heard a loud voice saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. The Holy One will dwell with them, and they will be God's own peoples." The one in the place of authority said, "See, I am making all things new. To the thirsty I will give water as a gift from the spring of water of life."
The trees shall clap their hands, the dry lands gush with springs, the hills and mountains shall break forth with singing. We shall go out in joy and be led forth in peace, as all the world in wonder echoes shalom.
Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered there were Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We'll go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it. And now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was Jesus, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and he jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was Jesus. Jesus took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead.
Ask the children to please come forward. Can you come up here? I'm going to try to sit down up here and then get up again, but we'll work on it, okay? Maybe you'll have to push me up or pull me up. Have a seat. I'm going to sit right here because it's an easier up and down. So, have any of you ever had to make a hard decision? You have? What kind of decisions have you had to make? Like whether or not to buy this CD or that CD? Have you had to decide whether or not to take this class in school or that one? Have you had to decide the really tough one, like should I study or should I play? Those were all decisions I had to make when I was your age, and they were all hard, especially the last one. Well, how do you make a decision? What do you use to make decisions? Do you toss a penny in the air and say, heads or tails or a nickel? No? Maybe? What you thinking? Come on now. Yes.
If one of us have to do something, then we play rock, paper, scissors to see who has to do it.
Oh, I see. So if the choice is who's going to vacuum or who's going to do the dishes, you do paper, scissors. That's a good way to make a decision on that. Anything else? How about decisions that are even harder? When you sometimes have you had this feeling that you weren't sure what to do, there was no easy answer, and it just seemed so difficult. You couldn't figure out what to do. Maybe you're having a problem with a good friend of yours, or maybe you were having a problem with a teacher, or maybe you were just having a problem at home with, your siblings. Then it's a really hard decision because it's not easy. Rock, paper, scissors won't do it. Well, I'm going to suggest that when that happens, that you have a number of really excellent options. One of them, and the first one I would suggest, is that you pray about it. You ask God what might be a good way to do that. And then the second one is that you talk to your parents or your grandparents or your aunts or your uncles, an important grown-up in your family, maybe a friend of the family even. And then I also want to tell you that, you can always go to Glenna and ask her for advice about really hard decisions. And you can ask the people here in the church who are your Sunday school teachers, like Miss Susan over there, and Annie, and Karen, and even me. And you can ask us, and we'll talk to you about it. We may not have an answer, but we can talk about it. You see, that's part of being a community, and sometimes that's the most important part, is that we can share things together and talk. And all of these people out here, every one of them cares about all of you. They care very much about you, and they want things to go well in your life. So if you come to a tough decision, you'll have help. In our story today, the disciples have tough decisions to make. They have to figure out what to do next. They've had a big crisis in their life. Their teacher, their leader, the person that they loved and looked up to is gone. He has been killed. And they're in shock, and they're hurting, and they're in pain, and they have to figure out what to do. So they do figure it out because they get help from Jesus. And they help themselves by talking about it and spending time together. So I hope you won't forget that if you have any tough decisions. Hopefully you won't have any tough ones next week, okay? All right. Thank you. There were a group of friends together. They were talking. They were all upset. It had been an awful, awful week and a half in their lives. They couldn't imagine what they were supposed to do next. They had spent 3 years with their teacher, and their teacher was gone now, and they didn't know what to do next. They really weren't able to figure out the next steps. How were they going to manage? So one of them, a good old boy named Peter, said, let's go fishing. Can't figure out anything else, let's catch fish. So they said, sure, why not? They all got in the boat, and they went out one night fishing. They fished all night long, the whole time. And what do they get? Nada. Not one little baby fish. Not even enough for a snack. So they say, well, it's not a very good night, and I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm just exhausted of this fishing. All of a sudden, they hear a voice from the shore. The voice says, are you catching any fish? They think, great. No fish. So, naturally, the person gives them advice, right? Throw the net on the other side of the boat. They think, yeah, right. Do they think we don't know you have to, how to do this job to fish on both sides of the boat? Of course we do. All right, but what will it hurt? They throw the net on the other side, and all of a sudden, it is as if they cannot move the net. It is so heavy with fish. They have way too many fish now. So one of them turns to Peter, and he says, Peter, I think that's our teacher. I think that's Jesus, our Lord, on the shore. Peter, who had gotten down to his loincloth, I think anyway, down to his loincloth, throws on his clothes, and dives in the water. Now, why? I don't know. But he does it. He dives in the water, swims to shore, because he wants to be the first one there. Leaves his friends dragging in this heavy, heavy net full of fish, so heavy they can't get it in the boat, so they have to drag it beside the boat. They get to the shore, and there is a person that they think they know, they think they recognize, and the best thing is there's a charcoal fire with fish and bread on it. They're hungry, they're tired, and there's bread and fish. And there's someone there with a loving way that says, "Come, have breakfast." But first, take a couple of those fish that you brought in, put them on the burner too, we may need them. So they put a few more fish on the charcoal fire, and they have breakfast. The person gives them the fish, gives them the bread, and they feel better. Well, it's a nice story, right? We'd all feel better if that's what happened to us. If we were lonely and discouraged and unhappy, and somehow it turned all around, and instead of having a little bit, we had an abundance. This story could almost be a nice little bedtime story, right? It's a good story. Now, if that's all it is, I'm in big trouble, because I still have to do a homily after this. So let me just say, I think it's more than a good little story. I think it's a lesson for all of us about faith and work, because the two go together. We learned that a long time ago in the Protestant church, that faith and work go together. And that's what I think happened. You see, I think first off, when you're discouraged and unhappy, work helps. When you listen to the voice of God, you find faith. And it may not be the way you thought it was going to be, but you still find it. Now, when you think about faith, you might think to yourself, I don't have much of that. I think we heard a wonderful sermon from Rebecca last week, very spiritual sermon about doubting. And I think we sometimes do doubt ourselves, and that's okay. The woman that Rebecca used as one of the illustrations was Mother Teresa, who doubted a lot, all the time. But she said that the only time that she didn't have doubt was at the communion table. She would sometimes get a glimmer, a glimpse of the divine at the communion table. I think that when the people were given the bread and the fish by Jesus, the disciples had that glint of the divine because they saw love. Now, this is really a big-time story, too, about abundance, because that is part of what we get by living in the Spirit and believing. We get abundance. Now, it may not seem that way, but we do. We get abundance. I look out here and I see all of you people here in this beautiful church with a wonderful choir and great musicians. We have abundance. And you know what else? We don't just live off our abundance. We go out and stand with others who need an encouraging word, that need a friend, that need someone to talk to. We go and do that. We go and practice social justice. We go and we try our best, in spite of our abundance, to live in a world that gets greener and is made better by our being conscious of what we do and how we live, the resources we have. We live in abundance. You see, we serve Jesus, who is big time into abundance. You know, not very far from where this story happened was a story of the wedding at Cana. And you know what happened there? They ran out of wine. And Jesus didn't make the water into a couple of extra bottles just to have a final toast. No. He goes all out, barrels and barrels and barrels of wine. And you know what else? There was a story of the 5,000 being fed. Jesus said, these people are tired and hungry. He didn't say, give them a snack, give them a cracker or a crumb. No, give them a meal. Give them lots of bread, lots of fish. And in fact, there was so much that they couldn't eat it all. And they had baskets and baskets of leftovers. We serve a God of abundance. We live in a world of abundance. We are so blessed. Now, one of the other things I think happened that day was that they were allowed to participate in the miracle. That's called work. We all get to do that. We get to participate in all of the abundance and work of this church and in the work of the United Church of Christ. We get to participate in it. You notice in the story, they get to participate. I think work is a definite asset and something that we as human beings need. You see, otherwise, those disciples would have just been sitting around getting crazier and crazier in their thoughts, going round and round and round some more. They needed to work. They also probably had families to feed, and they needed to bring home some fish to feed their family. And some fish to feed would be nice, too, to sell. So they needed to be working, to be busy. Now, many of you have gone out and worked your whole lives doing this service to God in some way or another. Not everybody who works for God is clergy. In fact, most people who work for God are not clergy. So they go out and they do a little work, they're decided. And when they do a little work, they begin to process towards the end of having another encounter with Jesus. Now, they don't have to be perfect, and they aren't, but they have to be willing and loving. So what they do when they get to this work is what we do. I remember when 9/11 happened, I was in the position I felt so devastated, and I know many of you did. You couldn't figure out what to do next or what would be helpful or what happened. Well, what I did is probably what many of you did. I called up my son and daughter who lived in D.C. at the time and asked them how they were. I couldn't reach my daughter. She was on patrol at the Pentagon. But I reached my son, and I said, "How are you, and what are you doing?" He said, "I'm fine. I'm standing in line." He said, "I decided that I needed to do something, so I'm going to give blood." But he said everybody else needed to do something. So what did they do? They came to give blood too. So the line is around the blood bank and down the street, and I'm going to be here for hours. "What are you doing, Mom?" I said, "I'm taking calls from people who needed to talk about 9/11, and I'm planning a service for tonight." And he said, "Man, are you lucky, Mom. You have work to do when something bad happens." You know what? All of us have work to do when something bad happens. When something bad happens, it's even more important for us to offer a word of kindness and to show a little compassion and sympathy. That's what living the Christian life's about. Now, the next thing that I think happens to these working hard little disciples is they realize that they are important to Jesus because they have too many fish. That is an act of love on God's part, and they see it and they feel better because they know they're really loved. They notice the fish. You see, that's how they tell us Jesus is the too many fish. It could have been anybody else calling out to them, and they wouldn't have gotten too many fish. But they knew Jesus well enough to know that if Jesus was involved, Jesus would give them not enough fish, but too many fish. Too many fish for them, that they'd have to go out and sell it or share it. Because that's the way abundance works. Now, when I used to work in Florida, I used to occasionally do weddings on the beach. Not my favorite thing to do, let me tell you. One problem I always had was I would be in the middle of the service and people would come by and begin to heckle the bride and groom. Don't do it, they say. Just say no. Don't take on that ball and chain. This is going to be, And I will tell you that most, if not all of them, had already made a few stops along at the bars on Cocoa Beach before they got to the wedding service. But I know that we had to not listen to them. And so I think sometimes you want to just put on blinders and not listen anymore. And that would have been easy for the disciples, to put on those blinders and not listen. Now, it was important for the bride and groom not to listen. And thank goodness none of them did run away at the end. But they did. It is important that they did not listen. But it was just as important that the disciples did listen. And it's important for us when we are in the midst of big decisions and problems, for us to listen to that still small voice within each of us. There was a woman who had a really hard time in her life. Things were not what she wanted. She was going through a difficult time. And she decided that what she needed was a retreat, a spiritual retreat. So she went to a monastery ran by a number of nuns, and the nuns were known for offering help for people in hard times that were having difficulty with their faith. And so she went, and she was very excited to go, and the nuns graded her, and she said, "Now what am I going to do? How am I going to find my purpose here?" And they said, "Don't worry, it will find you." She thought, right. And they said, "Come, let us show you to your room." It was a small room. It was more like a closet than a room. It had a bed in it, and it had a bunch of junk in it. It had boxes and other things, and then it had a larger-than-life statue of Jesus in it that was broken. The statue had no hands and no feet. It was this broken statue. So she's like, "What? I'm paying all of this money, and I get put in this little closet with all the storage and junk that they probably should have thrown away." So every day she does the walking, she does the praying, and the last day she's there, she's sitting in her room on the little cot, and she looks up and she sees the statue of Jesus. And she says, "What am I supposed to do? I haven't found anything here." And then it dawns on her. The statue has no hands and no feet. Jesus has no hands and feet here except ours. Praise be to God. Amen. I once heard John Dominic Crowson speak, and one of the people that there asked him, "Do you believe in the resurrection?" And he said, "Yes, I believe in the resurrection, because there were 11 pretty stupid, fairly lazy, rather inept individuals who, after the resurrection, were able to lead a new religion and were able to bring their knowledge of Jesus to the world." He said, "That takes something, and I'm going to call that something resurrection. I'm going to call all of you resurrection. Go forth in resurrection. Praise be to God. Amen."
Amen. Now go forth after that music. You have to. I like that.